investment for Israel's military intelligence. He says Israel will not stop defending its interests in Syria, nor let the Russian military in on specific plans.
We would be limiting our own forces by saying to the Russians, look, we are going to hit this target, and the Russians would go and maybe defend the target, say, no, this is not the right target, they would choose something else. No, this goes into the concentrations of national security, which is not to be discussed with the Russians.
But there is concern in Israel that Moscow's planes in the air and advisors on the ground in Syria will limit Israel's ability to strike perceived threats in Syria. Professor Zisser says now that Moscow has gotten directly involved, Israel is waiting to see what the United States will do.
Doesn't matter what you do, at least show that you are a superpower and show leadership. Strong America is an Israeli asset. I mean, the Russian made a move, the American can make a move as well.
Israeli analysts don't expect the U.S. to counter Russia, but some say if Russia saves the Syrian regime, at least that's an enemy Israel knows well. Emily Harris, NPR News, Jerusalem.
Russia's president likes a good photo op, and there were a few today. It's Vladimir Putin's birthday. He turned 63 amid a bombing campaign in Syria, a weakening economy, and tension with the U.S. But he made a point of taking it all in stride, including admiration from his fans. Here's NPR's Corey Flintoff from Moscow.
President Putin occupied an even more prominent place than usual on Russian state television. He was shown meeting with his defense chief and hearing that Russian warships in the Caspian Sea have fired more than 24 rockets at targets in Syria. Then, as if to demonstrate that 63 years haven't slowed him down, he took part in a televised hockey game, playing alongside Russian stars of the NHL. There were also tributes to him, including a song released today by a pair of popular Russian rappers. It's called My Best Friend is President Putin. The song calls Putin a tough superhero and says, this is our destiny. Everything for him, and freedom flows like a river. The theme of Putin as a superhero was also promoted at a small art gallery in Moscow's Arbok district. Miloš Kojic is one of the organizers of an exhibition called Putin's Universe. It features paintings depicting Putin as various leaders and heroes, from Alexander the Great to Batman. One shows Putin as Sherlock Holmes with a deerstalker hat and magnifying glass.
This is an artistic view of Vladimir Putin's personal character. Probably artists saw him as an investigator and brilliant-minded man who can resolve difficult puzzles.
Kojic says the paintings were chosen from the best sent into the biggest Facebook fan page devoted to the Russian leader. Kojic leads the way past portraits of Putin as the god Thor, as Che Guevara, and as the soccer star Pele, kicking a ball drawn with the face of President Barack Obama. Putin is portrayed as a peace hero, too, as Mahatma Gandhi and Buddha.
Here is Vladimir Putin presented like Martin Luther King, and he was the most famous fighter for human rights. Also, Vladimir Putin is fighter for human rights, and he is protecting his people down in Ukraine, especially at Crimea.
While we were at that exhibit, there was only one other visitor, a 70-year-old pensioner who said no Soviet leader would have allowed himself to be portrayed this way. Does that mean that a cult of personality has developed around Putin? We met Vasily Ivanov, a 27-year-old engineer, outside a busy metro stop in central Moscow. I think there is a sort of cult, he says. It's the personality of the president, because who else besides him is worthy to lead the country? But it's not to make a god of him, he says. He's not God or Stalin or something else. He's president. Oscar and Galina Madmedov say they don't care what people in the West think. It makes no difference to us, Galina says. When people in the West make same-sex marriages, Oscar adds, or dye their hair red, we ignore it. This is our business, they say. We love and respect Putin, and he's a magnificent man. Corey Flintoff, NPR News, Moscow. We leave them in coat pockets, we use them as bookmarks, we stuff them in between the flight safety card and the motion sickness bag. But you might want to keep a tighter grip on your airline boarding passes.
That's the advice of Brian Krebs, who runs the website KrebsOnSecurity.com. He says along with your name and flight number, there's a barcode that could hold more sensitive information.
You sort of look at this thing, and it's just a blob of black and white information. You don't know what it says. But in fact, it's really easy to figure out what it says.
Someone in the know can scan it and access frequent flyer numbers and the code to your flight reservations.
You may be actually able to not only view their current and future flights, but in some cases even cancel those trips.
Sometimes that information is printed right on the pass.
Krebs says while security screening at the airport has increased, online reservation security hasn't.
Many airlines have fallen way behind in beefing up the security of their websites and how they authenticate their customers online.
So after you unpack, take that boarding pass and
Put it in the shredder or the fireplace.
Or Krebs says, just download the boarding pass on your phone.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. By October, most new college students are settled in on campus. But that's not true for many Native American students at Dartmouth College. That's because the controversial director of the school's Native American program has just been removed. From our Code Switch team, New Hampshire Public Radio's Peter Biello has the story.
It's a quiet morning at the Native American house at Dartmouth College. Freshman Sherry Sneezer has parked herself in the dining room to study. She's one of the 91 students currently at Dartmouth who rely on the Native American program for support and advice.
We just need a director right now because we don't have anyone to lead us, and we need some sort of support, someone we can relate to.
Sneezer is Navajo. Before she came to Dartmouth, she lived on a reservation in Arizona, where she says people are quieter and more modest. So being surrounded by noisy college students took some adjustment. She knew that there'd be cultural differences like these.
It's still kind of difficult, but I'm getting used to it.
The Native American program director is supposed to help students get used to it. That's why Dartmouth brought on Susan Tafe-Reed. When the college announced her hiring in September, it cited her work with the Native American student associations at Colgate and Cornell universities. It also promoted her, quote, leadership roles in her Delaware tribal community. That's when Nikki Michael, a member of the Delaware Tribal Council, said, wait a minute.
The two recognized tribes are in Oklahoma, and we've never seen her here.
As it turns out, Tafe-Reed's nonprofit, Eastern Delaware Nations in Pennsylvania, is run by members of the Tafe family. It's not a federally recognized tribe and doesn't claim to be. Michael says this nonprofit has no connection to actual Delaware Indians.
What upsets me is that they're taking money for Delaware culture. We have no idea what it's being used for.
A representative from Eastern Delaware Nations says they are entirely separate from the federally recognized tribe in Oklahoma, and that their connections to Native American tribes are legit, though undocumented.
So just because the tribe is not federally recognized does not mean that they're not legitimate.
That's Anton Troyer. He's a professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University in Minnesota. Troyer says lots of people self-identify as Native American without having documentation.
For a long time, being Indian was not cool, but now it is. And you also have people who have very, very tenuous ties to Native communities who are happy to raise up that part of their profile if they feel it will give them any advantage.
Dartmouth College and Susan Tafe-Reed declined our interview requests, but in a statement, the college defended her hiring, saying it can't ask job applicants about their heritage. The college says it's now looking for a new role for Tafe-Reed. For Sherry Sneezer, heritage is not a requirement to lead the program, but
They'd relate to me better if they were Native American. That would make it a lot easier to talk about spiritual and mental problems.
Problems such as feeling out of place at an elite institution like Dartmouth. The college says it's looking for a permanent director of the Native American program. In the meantime, current program coordinator Kiana Burke of the Narragansett tribe is in place to provide support to students. For NPR News, I'm Peter Biello in Concord, New Hampshire.
It's All Things Considered on WNYC. Coming up next, the man who won freedom for Johnny Hincapie. A court yesterday ordered a new trial for Hincapie, who spent 25 years in prison for the 1990 subway killing of tourist Brian Watkins. We're going to talk with Hincapie's attorney, Ron Kuby, coming up next. Stay tuned.
It's hard out here. We can't survive making $10 an hour. I mean, 75% of my check goes to my rent, living in New York City.
Hear the news from the people who are living it and analysis from reporters you trust. Listen to Morning Edition every day on WNYC.
WNYC is supported by Hospital for Special Surgery, named the #1 hospital in America for adult orthopedics according to U.S. News & World Report's Best Hospitals 2015-2016 rankings. Tri-state locations. Learn more at hss.edu. Geico, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. More information on auto insurance available at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO.
You're listening to All Things Considered on WNYC. I'm Jamie Floyd. A Queens man is free after spending more than 25 years in prison for a crime he says he did not commit. A state judge yesterday ordered a new trial for Johnny Hincapie, who was convicted of taking part in a 1990 killing of a tourist from Utah. Brian Watkins was here for the U.S. Open and was stabbed to death while defending his parents from a mugging inside the 7th Avenue subway station. He became a symbol of the violence that plagued New York during the late 1980s and early 90s when crack cocaine was rampant and the city had more than 2,000 murders a year. Along with the 1989 Central Park jogger rape case, the Watkins murder ignited a public outcry that compelled then-Mayor David Dinkins to expand the police force and crack down on crime. Joining me now to discuss the Hincapie case is his lead lawyer, Ron Kuby. Welcome back to WNYC.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
So, Ron, yesterday's ruling said that new evidence presented during a hearing earlier this year would have changed the outcome of Johnny's trial. So what was that evidence, and perhaps more importantly, what took so long for it to come out?
One of the crucial witnesses of the case had himself been indicted in the killing, a man by the name of Luis Montero. He spent 18 months in jail awaiting trial until finally the DA's office realized they made a mistake and they cut him loose. He was so traumatized about what happened, he left the country, went home, and it took a very intrepid journalist to track him down and get him to tell his story for the first time. The other witness that came forward was a young woman, Mary Lou Santana, who had seen the entire thing from start to finish. She recognized one of the attackers. She knew what Johnny Hincapie looked like. She was definitive that Johnny Hincapie was not among the group who participated in the attack, and indeed later she saw him waiting to buy tickets online at the Roseland Ballroom. She had not come forward out of fear of retaliation. She grew up in the housing projects. Her mother told her, you know, the police will straighten this out. Just keep your mouth shut.
Ron, Johnny Hincapie confessed to the crime when he was arrested in 1990. Wasn't that part of the evidence against him?
Yeah, that was really the only evidence against him. Nobody picked him out as one of the attackers, but he was 17 years old at the time, and after intense police coercion, which include beatings and chaining him to a chair, he gave the standard videotape confession. When the DA's office came in, they duly recorded him confessing. He immediately repudiated that confession, said it was had been taken under duress. The officer who testified that for the prosecution said that nobody laid a hand on Johnny, nobody mistreated him in any way, and in fact this detective went so far as to say that in 30 years of policing, from the mid-1960s to the mid-1990s, he had never once seen any police officer lay his hands on a suspect or strike a suspect in order to obtain information.
So what happens next? Is that the end of it? Johnny Hincapie is free and clear now?
Well, it should be the end of it. The district attorney's office is deciding whether or not to appeal the decision. I think they probably won't. Or they may decide to retry him, even in light of the new evidence, even in light of the fact that the judge had ruled that if this evidence had been available then, there was a reasonable probability that Hincapie would have been found not guilty.
But if there are new witnesses who say he wasn't present, and Johnny Hincapie now says his confession was coerced, can prosecutors win a conviction a second time around?
It strikes me as extremely unlikely that they could prevail, especially since more than anything, more than the evidence, the climate has changed, and you don't have this intense fear of every young black or Latino man. You don't have an instant mistrust of them and an instant trust of the police.
Just last June, you helped secure the release of another man, Shabaka Shakur, who spent 27 years in prison based on evidence amassed by NYPD Detective Louis Scarcello, whose credibility and methodology were called into question by a 2013 investigation by the New York Times. How many of these cases, Ron Kuby, do you think there are out there? How many wrongfully accused people are there behind bars?
Well, nobody counts the things that nobody counts. We just don't know. We know that as the technology gets better, gets more sophisticated, there are fewer and fewer mistakes made. But we also know that fundamentally, this is a system that's based on human judgment, and it's human judgment that's exercised in the most stressful and politicized and tragic of circumstances. So even if we're right 99 times out of 100, we can, we'll win every ball game. But in an era of mass incarceration, that leaves an awful lot of people who are innocent who are behind bars.
Ron Kuby, thank you.
Thank you, Jamie Floyd.
Ron Kuby is a criminal defense and civil rights lawyer. His client, Johnny Hincapie, was released from prison yesterday after new evidence emerged in the case. Mr. Hincapie spent 25 years, 1 month, and 3 days in prison.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Kelly McEvers.
And I'm Robert Siegel. When the U.S. Supreme Court considered a death penalty case last term, it erupted into a rare, nasty, and divisive debate among the justices. The case was a constitutional challenge to lethal injection procedures. Well, today, justices took up a case that was far more technical, but, as NPR's Nina Totenberg reports, still a matter of life and death.
At issue before the court were decisions by the Kansas Supreme Court reversing the death sentences of men convicted in 2 high-profile and horrific murder cases. In one case, known as the Wichita Massacre, the lower court set aside the capital sentences of 2 brothers because they were tried together instead of separately. In the other, the Kansas court said the jury instructions had been confusing. As the justices plowed through the 2 arguments, peppering counsel with questions, there were occasional echoes of last term's death penalty contretemps, and there was one foray by Justice Scalia into Kansas politics, a state where Republican officials are trying to remove funding for the courts. While there seemed to be more agreement among the justices today on the technical questions, the issue of the death penalty clearly remains an open sore, with Justice Scalia at one point today pointedly disdaining Justice Breyer's views on the subject. In the jury, ended that the state court had repeatedly cited the Constitution in its ruling, but not Kansas law. Justice Alito: if the Kansas court cited the state law, it would have to take responsibility for the decisions in these cases, which involve some of the most horrendous murders that I've seen in my 10 years here. So it did not take responsibility for that. It said we have to apply the federal Constitution instead. Justice Scalia asked if Kansas elects its state Supreme Court justices. We do, replied Attorney General Schmidt. And do you have people sentenced to death in the state? Yes, said Schmidt. There are 9 on death row. That would suggest, said Scalia, that the people of Kansas, unlike Justice Breyer, favor the death penalty, and that an election would not come out favorably for those justices who would reverse these convictions. I'm just speculating, of course, he added. Although Scalia and Alito are among the court's most conservative justices, they had plenty of company in their skepticism about the Kansas court decisions, even from the court's liberals. Justice Breyer, who has suggested it may be time to get rid of the death penalty entirely, noted nonetheless that it is common to try multiple defendants together, and that if the court were to sustain the Kansas court ruling, it would affect every criminal trial of gangs across the country. So for now, at least, there seems to be a certain détente on the court, but more death cases loom on the horizon. Nina Totenberg, NPR News, Washington.
It's WNYC and WNYC.org. Stay tuned for another hour of all things, another half hour of all things considered. Jeb Bush entered the 2016 presidential race as the GOP presumed front runner, but it's been a long time since that description has fit the candidate. In the first states to vote less than 4 months from now, he's fallen to the middle of the pack. Bush fatigue in Iowa and New Hampshire coming up next. It is still warm and sunny out there with highs in the low 70s. Tonight it will be partly cloudy and it will get down to about 58 degrees tomorrow, Thursday. Sunny again, but a whole lot cooler with a high in the mid-60s. Friday, rain coming back after 9 o'clock. We expect the rain to roll in and a chance of showers throughout the day, mostly cloudy with highs in the mid-60s. Currently 72 degrees and mostly sunny at 6 o'clock.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Avalara, tax automation for businesses of all sizes. Avalara's cloud-based technology is designed to simplify business tax by performing real-time tax calculations and enabling automatic return filing. Learn more at avalara.com. Constant Contact, with email marketing features like drag-and-drop editing and mobile-friendly templates. Constant Contact is committed to helping small businesses and nonprofits become marketers. Learn more at ConstantContact.com. And Classic Films LLC, presenting Billions in Change, a documentary of Manoj Bhargava about wealth and responsibility and the work he's doing in the areas of water, energy, and healthcare. Available for viewing at BillionsInChange.com.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM, New York. Just keep listening.
Doctors Without Borders is calling on the Geneva Convention to investigate the Kunduz Afghanistan bombing. It's Wednesday, October 7th. I'm Jamie Floyd. This is All Things Considered on WNYC. The executive director of Doctors Without Borders in the U.S. spoke out.
Today we pay tribute to those Doctors Without Borders staff who, while watching their colleagues die and with their hospitals still on fire, carried on treating the wounded.
More reaction to the U.S. bombing of a hospital coming up. Plus, profiting off the misery of migrants and refugees pouring into Europe. And what do Kevin McCarthy's constituents back in Bakersfield think of the man who wants to be the next Speaker of the House? We'll find out after news headlines.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. President Obama is apologizing to Doctors Without Borders, the humanitarian organization whose hospital was hit by mistake by U.S. warplanes in Afghanistan. Here's more Lyson has more.
The president apologized in a telephone call to Joanne Liu, the international president of Doctors Without Borders. The attack, which the White House calls a profound tragedy, killed at least 22 people at a medical clinic. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest.
When the United States makes a mistake, we own up to it. We apologize where appropriate. And we are honest about what transpired.
The president told Doctors Without Borders that the U.S. is investigating the attack to determine whether changes to U.S. military procedure are needed, but the International Medical Group is calling for an independent investigation to determine whether the airstrike was a war crime. Mara Eliason, NPR News, the White House.
Democratic presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton is coming out against the newly completed Trans-Pacific trade deal being championed by the Obama administration. Clinton, in an interview with the PBS NewsHour, saying like some previous agreements, which as she put it look great on paper, the so-called TPP may not hold up. We can also blame Republicans for blocking job creation legislation in the U.S.
Trade agreements don't happen in a vacuum, and in order for us to have a competitive economy in the global marketplace, there are things we need to do here at home that help raise wages, and the Republicans have blocked everything President Obama tried to do on that front.
While backers of the trade deal have said it will level the playing field for U.S. firms abroad, some labor groups worry it will send more U.S. jobs offshore. The U.S. Coast Guard is suspending its search for the 33 crew members of the El Faro cargo ship. The ship is believed to have sunk almost a week ago after being battered by Hurricane Joaquin around the Bahamas.